Yeah, okay, if you'd like to follow me, those that are going underground, well everybody, if you, whether you regardless going underground or not, if you're going around the site, everybody has to wear an helmet, okay? So let's go and get some helmets. As a group, but you all come out as a group. I'm still 26 short from about 2 years ago. We'll find it one day. Oh, at the deepest point you'll be around about 90 feet underground. But whether you're 1,000 feet or 90 feet, it's all the same. They're underground. Does anybody know how long we've got? No, we don't know how long we've got.
7 hours, I think.
7 hours. We're going to head down through the mill, so you all get to see everything in the mill. A bit of a talk as we go down through the mill. There are some steps in the mill to negotiate as you're going down. Okay, so take your time going down these steps, because as you can see, Geber is built literally on a hill right down to the cliff. When we get to the bottom, I will then send you into the underground. You all go through Indian file, okay, and I will wait for you at the exit, okay? And then from there, we come straight back up on site again. We go over and visit the dry, the winder house, take you to the museum, depending on what how we're doing for time, okay? Is everybody okay with that?
Yes.
Yeah, and or if everybody after the underground, if you would prefer, you wanted to go for a cup of coffee, unfortunately they don't do little gentlemen, okay? You might feel that you might want that after the underground, unfortunately I don't think they do, but a nice cup of coffee will go away. So it's down to you, it's your day. Please, my name is Steve, okay, incidentally. I'm a former miner here. Worked underground when this mine was in operation. I was a driller and blaster, and we'll talk a little bit about that later on if we get time to go over to the dry to the mill, because that way over there we've got photographs and whatnot, and I can not only just talk but I can explain things using photographs as well, so it'll be kind of like a talk though. Brilliant. Okay, so when we're ready, follow me. You're not big enough.
Downhill. This is going to be horrible on the uphill later.
Yeah, what's the steps?
Here we go. Find the steps.
Okay, anybody who wants to sit down for a couple of minutes, take your leg off the legs a minute, please sit down. Well, welcome to the mill. This is where the actual process of extracting the tin ore and the copper and any other precious metals that we're after, this is where it all happens, okay? So, everything's been broken underground, it's all been mined out, so now it comes to the mill. And basically how it gets to the mill is it comes up from underground in skips. And hopefully today, as we're going around, we'll be able to see those later on in the winder house and a little bit of explanation on how all that system works. But basically, you've got 2 skips working. That means once the men are dropped underground, the cages come off and on go the skips. And those skips go up and down all day long to the end of the shift where they take them off again, put the man riding cages on, and that brings all the miners out from underground. So behind you would have been originally here, behind you there would have been the crusher. So if he was in this mill, what you would have heard every so often is these skips coming up, and as they get to the top of the shaft, they swivel on a bed, turned over, tipped upside down, and it pours straight to the crusher straight behind you. Now, Just to let you all know, so you've all got to behave yourselves as well, because it's a question I'm asked quite a lot, is what did you do when the mine shut? Well, I was still a young man when the mine shut. And what I did is I went and joined the police force, and that's where I stayed to the day I retired as a police officer, okay? And I worked in all different departments in the police force, so best behaviour today, people. Okay? Stopping searches, I still know how to do it. So when we're ready, we're going to go on with it. Okay, so can you hear me all the back? Yeah? Fantastic. Right. First thing we're going to look at is the picking belt, because the picking belt in itself, as much as it is an automated job when the mill was working, many years ago, it was a job for the ladies. Okay, and even during the wars, First and Second World War, ladies were used to pick off bits of rubbish that comes up from underground. As you can see, you get odd bits of steel and blasted wire, and that's all picked up by this magnet. Back in the old days, the ladies had an eye for rocks. They knew which ones were just bits of granite and ones which contained tin or coppers, which is what we're after, okay? So that would be their job. Bell maidens, or bell meaning mine ladies, that was their job, totally doing this all day long. But this has been modernised, so it's been fully automatic. So this is what the stones are going to look like, the sort of size of the stone after they come out of the crusher. And from the crusher now, we move on to the next point. What we call heavy media separation now. Those stones you just seen on the picking belt would have ended up going into what we call cone crushers. Those cone crushers are basically a smaller crushing plant from the main crushing plant we just spoke about, yeah? Basically now the stones come out the size of chippings. So what we call 10 or 15 mil chippings, and they would have been dropped into this tank above your head, which is known as heavy media separation. Now basically this tank would have been full of a solution, a silicone-based solution, which for ease of talking about would have been a bit like wallpaper paste. Now guys, ladies, we've all played with wallpaper paste, haven't we? So we know it can be thick, gooey stuff. That's what would have been in this big tank there. Yes, a big pipe would have come from there, it would have flown further off down into the mill. But basically what happens here is this. All those chippings that have been crushed would have been dropped into the solution. It is a liquid. Has anybody ever seen a stone float? You would have here, because basically what happens is those chippings which contains tin ore sinks, and those chippings which don't float. And there's a big paddle right at the top of the tank here that is constantly taking off those chippings which haven't got no metals in them. The ones that have got metals carry on its further journey down through the mill. Those chippings which float would have gone off on a belt, washed, and then sent right down to the bottom, which you're going to see them out right down to the bottom of the mill, right down just beyond the underground, which is basically, to you, you think that's like a slag heap, that's what they call it. It's not, we just call it our sort of normal waste heap, because those chippings, once they go down there, they're not waste, they now become a byproduct. So that's another way that the mine makes money. So those chippings would be sold off, for example, in the building industry for making, say, concrete blocks, for roads, for use in roads. As a matter of fact, we even get sand, which we'll talk about later on as we go a bit further down the mill, and even that would be sold off as a byproduct. Now, as I say to everybody, when I worked here, if I got fed up gardening and I said to the wife, I've had enough of that garden, I'm going to just cover it in stone chippings. I could go along to the management, I could say, boss, is there any chance I could have a couple of tons? Little perks of the job, you get a ticket. I get my own little lorry, I pick up a couple of tons, I could take it back home, no more gardening. That's it. It's covered in chippings. So it's one thing that miners could have, and I say to a lot of people, if you drive through St. Justin Pendy, for example, and you pass a lot of houses, you'll probably see it in a minute, later on today when you're going home, you can see some of the fronts of the houses all got granite chippings on, you go, ha, I bet he worked at Geever. So he's had his couple of tons for a number of years, yeah? Right, we're going to take another walk, folk, down some of the steps again. Please. Be careful, take your time, follow me. You will ask, you will hear me once more saying to you, is everybody okay? Everybody all right? Yeah? You all good? Fantastic. Right. Welcome to the grinding mill. This is now the third process. Okay, we've gone through crunching and breaking up that rock, in now to heavy media separation, now the grinding mill, because those chippings now that contain the valuable tin ores at rafter, got to go in something like, for ease of talk, like a tumble dryer, but you wouldn't want a tumble dryer like this in your hand. There used to be a lot bigger one in there, folks, but we sold that off when the mine closed. Basically, what a grinding mill is, it's that big tumble dryer containing lots of little iron balls like this. And I'm going to pass this round in a moment for all you to feel. Please, don't drop it on your foot, because it will hurt. Okay, it's like baby cannonballs. So I'm just going to pass that round amongst you so you can feel all the way to that. Now there'll be about a couple of 3 ton of those in these actual ball mills, what we call them. And basically what that does, it reduces those chip-ins that I just talked about down now to like a fine sand. Okay? It'll do it within a couple of hours. Now you can imagine the noise here, folks.
Don't
you
drop
definitely
it.
would have had to wear some kind of ear defense. As a matter of fact, on the whole site, you've had to wear some kind of ear defense.
Don't!
No, it works extremely well. It's just an excellent way of breaking down the chip-ins. And if you take a look behind you,
Heavy.
You pass it on.
inside of these coal mining mills, used to be labelled in these metal plates. Okay. Now the problem with these is after a while, like anything with those going around inside, as you can well imagine, yeah. Just listen a moment. They do wear out after a while, yeah? So what they eventually did is they put rubber lining inside all of these grinding mills. And the thing is with the rubber as well, it does 2 things. It cuts down on that noise, but that's no big deal. Basically it made the balls work a lot better because with rubber, they bounce. Yeah? And they just go, so that made these more efficient. And incidentally, if you just look there behind you, you'll see that some of these balls have gone down inside. They do wear out. They don't take them out. They just leave them in this work. They just add the ball. We just add new balls to the grinding mill all the time, depending on their wear and tear. Yeah. Okay, yes, it's a shaking table or vibrating table, yeah? Cornwall coming down and shaking tables in the mill. Well, basically, as I talked about earlier on about Geber being on a hill, so you can imagine that gravity plays a big effect in the job of sorting out, getting that valuable tin ore. Now, from that grinding mill we just talked about, can you see this box here? It's only just a little box just up in the corner. That is the sieve. And what will happen is, as the sand particles now come out from the grinding mill, they go through that sieve, and those particles are sorted into about 3 different sizes: large, medium, and small. The large go off to certain tables, the medium go off to certain tables, and the small sand particles go over to certain tables. Again, these would have worked 24/7. They don't stop for nothing. They only stop if they need service or maintenance. Incidentally, this table here has only been working the last 3 or 4 weeks. We sent it back to Holman to have it all repaired, so now it's been completely revamped. Only one little problem with it is because we are a heritage site, everything has to go back as original as it was, or as near as original. So say for example, the motor up there, you can see it's painted yellow. We actually had to source that yellow paint so it fell in line with what was originally used, yeah? So basically, what happens is, you see all this pipework above us, this sand, or what we call now slurry, as we like to call it, is fed using water, and the water that we use, again, is what's been pumped out the mine. It comes out around about 16,000 litres, around about that in a minute. That tells you what type of water we get underground, okay? It wouldn't have been as clear as this. It would have been this red oxidey brown you can see all around you, yeah? Face that comes over the table with a slurry. And can you see we've got 3 different troughs here on the ends of these tables? One trough is for tailings, middlings and headlands. Basically a tailings trough is just pure sand. Do you remember what I spoke to you just up there saying nothing's wasted? That sand then goes off, washed down through, goes down through these trenches you can see. That goes off down the bottom, we stockpile that, and again we sell that off later on as a byproduct. The middle one here, what we call middlings, is sand particles which have still got little bits of tin ore on it. So what do we do with that? We gather that up, that goes through a second process, and then carries on its journey from there. And finally this one, the money box, this is the one we're after, the headings box. That's where the tin ores and the coppers all come from here. That then goes on its journey, and we're going to talk about that in a moment as we go on down through the mill, okay? As I say, this water, where do you think we get water from underground? What's it doing today? Raining, yeah. Do we get any other water underground? Well, what we'd have to do is surveyors, once in a while when they're going around underground, they take a sample of water and they test it. And they test it for reasons because there's different things going on underground. But one thing we have to keep an eye on is how much of that water is saline or salt. Why? Because this mine goes out underneath the seabed, yeah? So we get ingress of water coming in the seabed, rainwater. Not only that water, all the machines underground, the drilling machines, they have to use water to keep the dust down and to lubricate the hole when they're drilling. So we do get a lot of water. Now this particular water, when it's done its job here, we used to flush that out back down into the sea. Can we do that today? No, because it would destroy the marine environment. You'd have to go through special filter plantations before we could before we could push it back down to the sea. So the water isn't wasted, and even then when it goes down, it's finished its process here, it goes down into settling ponds, and in those settling ponds, any bits of tin or coppers that we've missed will settle on the bottom of the pond. We then sluice that water off back to the sea, we pick that up, and guess where that goes? Straight back up the top, and it goes through the whole process again. So we're looking for about a 95% recovery. This particular mill is roughly, on average, do 2,000 tonnes of rock per day, can roughly get 4 or 5 tonnes of tin ore, yeah? Now you might think, well that's not a lot for 2,000 tonnes, but at this moment in time, if this was a mine still working, the price of tin at the moment on the stock market is around about £33,000 a tonne. So that isn't bad for a day's work, is it? Well over £100,000 a day coming through this mill 7 days a week. Okay, 30, 31 days a month. That'd be pretty good money. I'd be quite happy with that, wouldn't you? Yeah. Okay, any questions so far, folks? Okay, we'll move on to the next thing. Okay, so we now come to another process in the mill, which is known as froth flotation. So there's 2 or 3 things you see now to do with flotation, or water or liquids involved. Again, this is no different because by now we've got the tin. As I just said, it went into that headings pocket. That tin now comes down to either one of these machines. Basically what happens here is another chemical reaction or chemical exchange, because we now have to purify the tin. We have to get rid of some things to make it pure. Now many years ago in mining, they used to cook the tin after they got the tin ore. It looks a bit like pepper, black pepper. Once we've got it, I'll show you a little bit in a moment, folks. That then has to be cleaned up. And the only way to clean up years ago is to do what we call cook it. Okay? Now, a lot of people ask me, what's all these chimneys all around here for? Are they for some kind of, to get air down into the mine? No. They were for cooking the tin. Okay? And they used to cook it around about 600 degrees Fahrenheit, and that would get rid of things like, say, the coppers. Okay, that would melt the coppers out. That would all go into a separate channel. But one particular thing that we're after, which is very, very poisonous, okay? It's used a lot in pesticides. It used to be used a lot in paint. As a matter of fact, it used to even be used a lot in medication, I believe. So some of us here at some point even might have ingested it at that point, okay? But basically what happens here is when this tin oil goes into this chemical solution, it's like an anthrite, it's a chemical, what we call chemical reaction. Those bits that we don't want oxidize and float to the surface. The tin does not, it stays at the bottom. And again, we've got some paddles here, and those paddles go around and they take off the things like the coppers that we don't want and whatnot. That would all be gathered up. Once that's all gathered up, every so often, about a couple of months, we used to sell that off to a big factory in Finland. Okay, and they would deal with that process there in Finland. Again, nothing wasted. As a matter of fact, we even used to get gold and silver. Okay, so now before you all get excited and run off to buy yourself a pick and a shovel and say I'm going to go gold digging in Cornwall, gold and silver per week, per month, let's go per month, shall we? Wouldn't be enough to cover my baby fingernail. Sorry to let you down on that, folks. I know think they're all gone gold rush mad now, that's it, we're going to start going gold digging now. I'm afraid it wasn't that much. Coppers, that would range around about 15% or even lower. So on average, let's look at say between 7 and say 15%. But by and large, it would be tin. And don't forget that this tin also will be graded A, B and C. Now for example, the grade A tin will go into precision engineering. There's no doubt about that. That is your best quality tin. Grade B, you've all probably got a bit of grade B and even a bit of grade C, probably in your pockets now in the form of mobile phones, because what goes into the electronics for the solder joints now, that's all got tin in it. As a matter of fact, you've probably even got tin in your glass in the window screen of your car. And what else can we think of the uses for this? Hundreds of uses for tin, not just the good old tin cans that we see. As a matter of fact, grade C tin will be used in the production of plastics. Okay. There will be some sort of adjustment with that at the moment, with what's going on now in the world, and we're going to have to change a few things now. So there might be some changes there later on, who knows. But this is basically froth rotation. But anyhow, back to what we saw about. The one thing that we're trying to get rid of is arsenic. Okay? Arsenic, all those years ago when I say they used to cook it in those chimneys, it'd be the jobs of miners and young boys at the end of the day or at the end of each working week to go up into those chimneys and scrape that arsenic off, because it forms up like a soot, like we get at our chimneys at home when we use coal fires. They didn't have no form of mask, no form of goggles, no form of breathing apparatus. They actually breathed that in. Not only that, when it was being cooked, that would go up the chimney, and sometimes on a southwest wind that would be pushed right across Pendine. So people up there, without even knowing it, was inhaling arsenic. Okay, arsenic is a slow poison. It doesn't kill you straight off. It kills you over a period of time. Basically what it does, it breaks down your organs, your livers, your kidneys, your heart, your lungs. So now we can see why miners, back all those years ago, hundreds of years ago, life expectancy for a miner, anybody?
25?
A bit more, perhaps? But you're not far off.
30 then.
30, 32, yeah, but 25, yeah, possibly, yeah. Young boys would start working in these mines as young as 8. As a matter of fact, in some tin mines in Cornwall, they recorded them working on surface as young as 5. How would you get a 5-year-old to work? As a matter of fact, when we go around later on, possibly in the museum hopefully, look at some of the photographs and you'll see some of the pictures there where some of the young boys are posing with some of the older miners. Look at their feet. They've got nothing on their feet. Okay, young boys back then working barefooted. dread to think about that. It was terrible just wearing proper protective clothing when I was mining. But there you go. Right, folks, we're going to get a little bit more now. Again,
Rather tinny oil ball.
that's all clear there now, James. You've got through now, right? Okay, folks. Okay. It's near enough now come through its life in the mill. We're getting close now to the actual finished product now. But one or two things that we also have to do is what we spoke about just now about the quality or grade of tin. We've got a simple machine here. Okay, believe it or not, in the 50s, Beaver had a computer. Okay? Now, the problem with our computer was you couldn't get the internet on it. You couldn't take photographs and keep photographs on it. But it was such an intelligent computer that it had two lights, that's all, red light and a white light. And that was it, that was our computer. And basically what happened was, tin used to be fed through isotope cleaner here, okay? Basically taking x-rays of it and just ensuring the quality or the grade of that tin, okay? So up in the office, one light would flash good, one light would flash bad, so you know what the quality of the tin was like going through, yeah? So you could come down, take samples of it, whatever, the surveyors could go off with it and do whatever they had to do with it when they were sampling it. But by and large, basically, what it did is just take x-rays of tin, okay? And that would feed back then on our computer. Now folks, if you want to look behind you, we've got another machine that the tin has to go through. This is called magnetic separation. Now, if anybody knows anything about tin, and the alloys of tin, what goes with tin to make bronze and things like that, one thing you may not know about tin is the fact is tin is not magnetic. Even though it's a metal, it's not magnetic. So basically what happens here is the tin goes through the magnetic separator. Do you remember we spoke about those iron balls up there, yeah? And they crush up all the chip-ins? Eventually what will happen is you'll get loads of little bits of splinters coming from them. This will pick them up on the magnet, and any other metals that we don't want, which have not fallen off on the shaking tables, whatever, the magnetic separator will get them. And of course, when we get so much of that, those splinters of metals, we get it all on a big heap, and we send it straight off back to the smelters, and they just turn it back into more iron balls for us. So again, didn't you see that we was recycling a lot of the stuff long before we heard about recycling? The tin itself, that doesn't get affected by the magnet, that carries on its journey. And as you can see down there, you see loads of the ladies benefit tumble dryers. Loads and loads of tumble dryers because then the tin has to be dried. And where it's dried then, it's then simply bagged and then it's ready for sale. Yeah? So back in the day when I was working here, it used to go to Liverpool for smelting. Now, if we was a mine working today, it can go all down the world for smelting, because as a matter of fact, we actually started dealing with places in Hungary and Romania and whatnot where we sent it for smelting. But by and large, at one time, a lot of the tin in Cornwall used to go to Liverpool for smelting, okay? I know you're all keen to go underground, aren't you? I can see it on your faces. You'll all get issued with a pick and a shovel, believe me. Oh, £33,000 a ton, I'd like to see it on the face. Little tub.
It's worth a few bob, isn't it?
It's probably worth a few bob now, yeah. It is.
But it's not as tasty.
What's in your pocket?
It could be drinking chocolate.
Yeah, it looks like chocolate.
Okay.
Have we all seen?
Have everybody all seen it? Okay, fantastic.
Well, I didn't try that.
Well, just before we head off on the underground, what's going to happen now is I'm going to take you down to the underground. I am not going in with you. I am sending you in, okay? It's all one way. It's all lit. It's all level. You will not be required to climb up and down any shafts or anything like that, okay? You will be required to get me a ton of tin, okay? You're not coming out till you do. But it's straightforward. There's only one way. It's kind of horseshoe shaped, okay? The guides are here as well. And what I'll do is I'll wait for you on the exit. From the exit then, hopefully it's going to stay a bit shallow. We've got to walk up that little bit of a hill, okay?
Yeah.
Right. That was the mill. Now we're on our way down to go underground in the mine.
I'm glad it's sunny. Turned out good, didn't it?
All sheltered in.
Oh, quick introduction on Mickey. Very, very, very important man down here. Very experienced miner, been mining all his life. Originally from Ireland, he has worked in Levant mine as well as Geber mine. Mick was one of our TGW representatives when I was mining, so that means if I had a complaint or something I wasn't happy about something, he was one of the men that I would go and see, and I could moan to him till he told me to go away.
Or words to that effect.
Or I had
Yes.
Yeah, very, very experienced miner. As a matter of fact, I worked on 60 level for a while as a stoper. Mick worked in the next drive down from me as a stoper. He was a stoper as well. So we had a lot of connection. Okay, we're the ones that drill up into the ceiling. We sort of go up vertically, whereas developers, they drill tunnels horizontally. Once they've gone through, the likes of me and Mick come behind, and then we take the load out from one level to the next. Okay, we're going to talk about that a little bit more when we get up into the museums, because there are some diagrams in there to explain it to you a bit better, okay? Well, Mick's going to have a brief talk there. Got any questions for Mick? Don't be afraid to ask. He's a very knowledgeable miner. He's going to tell you also about Mexico mine as well, okay? So gather around Mick. He's only got
I hope you're all enjoying your trip to Geber, folks.
Can you hear?
As you know, it closed in 1990, but it depends on who you speak to, because as far as I'm concerned, it closed 1986. And most of us think it was 1986 it closed, although it did reopen at the end of 86 with a different management structure, different financial system,
That's the main.
but it wasn't very successful. When I worked there, it was a properly managed company, a properly unionized company. Okay. I finished 86, started at 69. Now this little mine here, folks, this was discovered in about, rediscovered I should say, in about 1994. This is called Wheel Mexico. It's not part of Geber. Okay, it's a separate mine altogether. So it is small and narrow. Not ridiculously small and narrow, but it is narrow, and you certainly have to watch your head here and there. You'll know when to watch your head, okay? Now, nobody knows why it's called Real Mexico. We know that a lot of Cornish men worked in Mexico at one point, but this mine would predate that time. So unless somebody came along who'd worked in Mexico and perhaps give it a name or change the name, we don't know. I think prior to the Reformation it was quite common for them to be called after a saint back in those days, okay? Any questions you'd like to ask? About Gaber or this one, doesn't matter. No, you okay with that?
Yeah, go for it.
So, yeah, well, at Gaber Mine itself there was 376 employees. Okay, 376, which is quite a lot in this part of the world. The wages were good, they were 20% above the national average. And some of the men, depending on your job, could be perhaps touching up to, not always, but it was possible to earn up to £100 a shift, okay? For the guys who were paid on results, which so it attracted a lot of people to come in. The people who tended to be the high earners were called machine men or rock breakers or stopers and developers. There was about 40 of those altogether, okay? They all thought they were the bee's knees. They were the macho men, I know because I was one of them. And of course everybody else had their own jobs to do and everybody was important, regardless of their job, okay? The mill here worked 24/7. Underground, most of the work was on day shift. There were a few people night shift, but not very many. Okay.
Right.
Is there anything you'd like to ask before you go through?
No?
You okay with that?
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for coming. So go through, just let your eyes readjust when you get in here to the darkness. You can see where you're going perfectly well, that's not a problem.
It's dark. We're inside the mine. Mind your head, I'm glad I'm short. This is my right height. So dark, guys. Where are we then?
We're in.
Oh, look at that, guys. So dark. Mind your head. I'm okay.
My helmet's sticking up a bit.
This is the mine. We're underneath. I'm just so pleased that I'm short. Guys, mind your head. This is very, very low. You need to kneel down. Kneel down. Oh my God. Can't get up.
You're only short.
Yeah, but it still hit my head. Yeah, this is awesome. This is awesome. Best experience. Oh. It's getting lower and lower.
You're going up, yeah?
No, it's getting
Still going down.
lower and lower.
Are you forward?
Yeah.
You'll be crawling soon.
Oh my gosh, this is really low.
Oh, we need already.
Oh.
Some of them are fun getting through here. No wonder Steve didn't want to come.
My camera is getting steamy.
Yeah.
Oh, wait, straight your back.
Here. Stretch a bit.
Stretch your back. Okay. Bend again. This is awesome. This is the best experience. What's underneath there? Okay, you're okay. You can stand up now.
What we need later. Can't see daylight.
No, it's not daylight. Oh, this is long, long way. Well, so far we've been here 4 minutes. Right, you need to bend again. It's a bit tight.
No fat people.
I am. Ooh, scary. Straight.
Stand up now.
You can stand up now. We're all right. Straight.
Yes.
So what happened if something happened underground?
Quite slower.
What happened if
If it collapses,
Yeah.
you'll get buried.
Don't say that.
Collapse the scope, right? And then mark it up far.
Oh, mind your head.
That's what we got there.
Good. Mind your head.
Well, I can see daylight.
I can see the light. We're nearly there. Yay.
Some steps, don't trip.
Don't trip, there's some steps.
Try and stay inside.
Mind the step. Wow, that's an awesome experience. Oh,
You can go and get them, so I'm just going to hold you a little bit. Yeah, why is it very small there, do you think? Well, let's have a think. If I took you underground and gave you what you can't do because it's now completely flooded, when you go down there in comparison to this, oh, it's huge. Why is it huge? Because we had the technology and the machinery. That's why. Tunnels down there, you can play a game of football in it. It's totally different underground in Cuba to what it is in the early 18th century one. This is a very good example of what all the mines around the Cornish coast would have been like working underground. Now, if you've only got the basics of tools, like gads, which is Cornish for like coal chisel, a pick and a shovel, you're only going to concentrate on moving the amount of ground that is only required. Okay? If you haven't got the machinery, you're not going to try and move hundreds and hundreds of tons of rock, especially if you're working on a load this wide, okay, say 6 inches wide, then all the rock either side of that is non-mineral bearing, so it's not going to make you no money. Okay? The miners back in these days would have worked on 2 methods of mining, either tut working, which is the way that all mining went in the end. Tut working is what I used to do. In other words, I used to get paid for the amount of ground that I broke. Okay? In other words, it's piece rate. So the more ground I broke, the more money I would make. If it was just on the other side of working on this, they used to just get paid on the load, what was in the load. So if the load was good, you get paid good wages. If the load wasn't very good, you just have to put up with it. And these miners as well that worked here, they couldn't be self-employed. So that would have meant that, of course, they're going to associate with other miners working other mines around there. And if they hear that they're earning 2 or 3 shillings or more a week, or pennies, as it might have been in those days, what are you going to do? You're going to up tools and you're going to head out there, okay? Blasting in here, yes, they have done some blasting. They would have used black powder, the same they used in cannons and muskets of that period, okay? But it would not have brought down the face like it did when I was mining. It would end up with a great big lump of rock which would come in with a mucker then and clear. It only would have fractured the face. That meant coming back in with those gads I mentioned, driving them into the cracks and working it and trying to get those stones out. And of course then the young boys would have the job of dragging that all out the mine or taking it to the nearest shaft where it'd be pulled up. Again, it'd have to be pulled up on what we call a whim shaft. That meant you'd have to have a horse tethered to a type of winch, or 2 mules, for example. They'd be pulling out the surface. If not, men would have to be working a winch to bring that to the surface. Again, everything done by hand. Nothing at all done with any machinery. The average height, and this was census done in those days, the average height of miners back then, 5'2", 5'3". It's only little short guys, okay? It's a cool twist of DNA, you might call it. But they were perfectly suited to mining. So that's why those tunnels are not designed for their height. They're designed on the fact that they only took what they needed. Okay? Would anybody like to have worked in those conditions? No. It gets even worse. It gets worse.
You had to.
A lot of these mines are settled to water. Geysers. We spoke about it on. Water comes down through the ground, like today through rainfall, would have seeped through the ocean floor. You would have worked knee deep or waist deep if you was on the face in this filthy, dirty red water. And that would have meant, guys, also, like a lot of miners underground, there's a question we get asked, and I'm going to now answer it for you. What do you do if you want to go for a pee? What do we do, gents?
Nothing.
Thank you very much.
Against the wall.
If we want to do the other, we've got to go find a porteroo at one of the stations. Literally, if you get caught with your pants down underground, you can end up being dismissed from the job under health and safety. Okay? But the other bit is, yes, gents, ladies, you want to go for pee. Now, you probably would rather work in that with people peeing alongside you. Now, water was probably the worst enemy of tin miners. Because sometimes you could be working on a face, especially in these days, back in those days, because the surveying wasn't very good. Again, they didn't have the machinery to be able to survey like we did underground. They didn't have things that we call long hole drilling. Now, long hole drilling is those guys to come in and they drill for hundreds of meters into the face. Then they take that all out and they collect core samples, and that tells you already what's lying ahead of you. They wouldn't have had this. And if there was water ahead of you, for example, these miners have been known to come across pockets of water, blast the face, and all of a sudden that would have collapsed on them and they would have drowned, literally drowned underground. As a matter of fact, there is a mine that they did the Poldark, do I dare mention his name, Mr. Poldark, on one of the old mines a bit further towards Land's End. And to this day, there are several miners and several boys down there that got trapped after a cave-in. We call them slips and ground. Cave-ins, by the way, are not very common in Cornish tin mines. They're very rare. As you notice, coming through this mine, did anybody see any pit props? Not really. We don't need pit props in Cornish tin mines because they're solid ground. They hold themselves up, as opposed to our cousins that work in coal mines. They need pit props, okay? They're very, very solid in tin mines. And another thing, talking about comparisons with coal mining, in Cornish tin mines you don't get flammable gases like methane like they do in coal mines. It's perfectly safe to smoke underground. That's why Cornish tin miners worked under, back in those days, all worked under candles. Yeah? But you can imagine working underground, if you get an inburst, even a small inburst. I've been underground when my lamp has gone out. And I'm literally on my own and I'm left in the dark. Because when your lamp goes out, it's not like going into a darkened room and then after so many minutes your eyes adjust to it. Okay? And of course, if you know your own bedroom or you can navigate your way around. When your light goes out underground, it's perpetually black. You can put your hand to your face, you will not see nothing. It is just pure black because you don't get any impression of light whatsoever to help that sort of take that little bit of edge off. Okay? Yes, definitely working knee deep or waist deep in water. Boys as young as 8 to 9 would have worked in this mine. They wouldn't have gone to school. Back in those days, you could tell you what life would have been like back in those days. Everybody in the family, as soon as they was old enough to work, had to work to put bread on the table, literally. Type of diet, would they have had pasties underground here? Would they be? No, I don't think so either. Have I ever had a pasty underground? I ate one time and it gave me so much bloody heartburn and then it just okay, but I do like my pasties, believe you me. But I had a cold pasty underground. No, again, very poor diet. They probably would have gone underground maybe with a few boiled potatoes, maybe a little bit of salted pork, or what's that out there? You see, what you get from the sea? Fish. Yes, toe rag. Anybody know what toe rag is? Salted fish. Smells like smelly thing. Really sweaty, smelly thing. Yeah. So it would have been a very poor diet. So imagine working as hard as what they did, living off a very poor diet. In some cases in these mines, wages-wise, they weren't paid wages, they were paid tokens. And if you know that this mine was paid by token, then you would know that this mine would have had a mine token. That was the only place you could spend your tokens. Now, again, people that own these mines was interested in one thing, money. They weren't interested in your health. If you blew your hand off underground and you was went in one of the mine colleges, it's always somebody who would take your place. So they had to be very, very careful. There was no backup, there was no NHS in those days, no DHSS, nothing like that existed. Folks were going back to the 1700s, yeah? So it would have been a very, very cruel life. Incidentally, apart from mining, what else could these miners have done? crew saved their finances and the ideas, what we're famous for here in Cornwall. Thank you. That's one. And the other one? Smuggling? Shipwrecking. Yeah. Shipwrecking. Now, I'm not saying these miners were involved. There's a good chance that they probably were involved in it. Now, back in the days, if a ship came ashore, it was been a big sailing ship in those days, these people would have gone straight down. Those people on that ship would have thought, great, we've got people come to rescue us. Lloyd's law stated in those days that if all the crew didn't survive the wreck, you teletype yourself to the cargo on there. So as soon as those people tried to swim ashore, children as well, couple of boats straight into the town. Then they would take all the goods. And of course, you can go around to some of these villages to this day, especially in some of the older pubs, and see some of the wheelboats go.